Sometimes after hearing the gospel, maybe the challenge of the gospel, the teaching of the gospel, we might ask ourselves a question. But is it the right question? How does it apply to me? What is he trying to say? I think the right question we should ask ourselves in today's gospel is this question. Am I living my life in such a way that I am truly a minister of the gospel? Each of us, truly a minister of the gospel. What does that mean? Now, most of us would look, or you all would look to the clergy like, well, that's your job. You're ordained, right? Yeah, when I was given the book of the gospel on the day of my ordination as deacon, the archbishop was perched in his throne and I was kneeling in front of him, and it was given to me like this, and I held the book. And the words were, "Here, receive the book of the gospel, whose herald you are. Believe what you read. Teach what you believe. And practice what you teach." That's the words of ordination for the diaconate when I was ordained nearly 15 years ago. But on the day of baptism, Elizabeth's going to bring this beautiful child to baptism in, I think, 3 weeks. We're going to give you a baptismal due. You comb your hair fine. And we're going to ask Elizabeth and her husband, John, you've asked to have your child baptized. In doing so, you're accepting the responsibility of raising her in the faith. To love God and to love the neighbor. Do you clearly understand what you're asking? Each of us were asked that about our children, and those who were baptized as adults were asked the same thing. So in light of today's gospel, whether we are ordained, whether we are laity, all of us are baptized with the same office thrust upon us by virtue of our baptism. We're all called to be ministers of the gospel. All of us. So what does that mean? Today's gospel message is very clear. Love God with your whole heart, your whole mind, your soul. Love God and your neighbor as yourself. You might ask the question, well, how do we love God? A God we can't see, a God we can't touch. Jesus gives the qualifier. To do that, as St. John would say, if you say you love God and hate your neighbor, you're a liar. So Jesus adds to that, saying the greatest of commandments is to love God, to know God with all your heart, with all your strength, and to do that in action by loving the other. To seek the greater good of the other. That's the call of the gospel. We are all called to be ministers of that greatest commandment. That commandment is greater than all of church law. And you're called to live it as well as I am. But do we fail? Miserably sometimes. I think of a priest in my youth who's long gone and dead. I served under him years and years ago, and he was quite an autocratic, clerical kind of guy. He was a priest that was worried about the purity of the law. He would make sure you understood the laws of the church. Here's your do's and here's your don'ts. After I was ordained, there was a story brought to me by a person who was no longer Catholic. She said to me, you know, years ago I belonged to St. Andrew. I said, oh, really? She said, yeah, I had a miscarriage. And the priest of that time said to her, well, you know, your child is in limbo. She said, I left the church. And I said, good for you. Good for you. Because number one, limbo never was part of the church's teaching. I defy any of you to go back and to see where that was a teaching of the church. It was a hypothesis that was never verified. And some people preached this like it was truth. It wasn't. What God brings into existence is made in God's image and likeness. God don't make junk. Look at this beautiful child. So to say something like that, who's hurting and in pain, who lost a child, the man was not a minister of the gospel. He showed no compassion. God rest his soul. But what about us? We come here on Sunday. We receive the Blessed Sacrament every Sunday. We're good Catholics. We've gone to confession and all that. But on Monday, do we look at people in a way, in a negative way, that is counter to the mission of the gospel? Counter to your mission as ministers of the gospel. Well, we can't talk to him because he's black. Or he's gay. She's had a divorce. We profile, we discriminate, we carry our prejudice into the world, and we forget to carry one thing. Are we ministers of the gospel? Showing compassion, showing love for the sake of the other, building up the other as God intends them to be built up. To know, love, and to serve God with all of our hearts, all of our souls, and to love our neighbors ourselves is the call of every minister of the gospel, laity and ordained. And I can't give you a better example of this than a saint that was recently canonized, I think 3 weeks ago. A saint that lived in El Salvador, Archbishop Oscar Romero. And Archbishop Romero, who was very close to the ruling family of El Salvador, realized what they were actually doing to the people of El Salvador, how they were actually being tortured and murdered. And he started not only speaking out, but he was speaking out with passion as a minister of the gospel, not as a cleric of the Catholic Church. As a minister of the gospel, predicting his own death. And he said to them, he said, "You kill me, and I will rise up in the El Salvadorian people." And indeed, on March 4th of 1980, as he lifted the chalice from the altar consecrating the blood of Christ, he was shot by an assassin. And his blood mingled with the blood of Christ. And his prediction came true. He rose up in the El Salvadorian people and today declared a saint of the church. But to give you some of the beauty of this man and the way he lived, he wrote a prayer that I'd like to share with you. This prayer is about being ministers of the gospel, regardless of the future that we understand. We just have to be everything God intends us to be in the moment. This is called A Future Not Our Own, written by Archbishop Oscar Romero, who was murdered on the 24th of March, 1980. It helps now and then to step back and to take a long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our effort, it is beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetime only a tiny fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is the work of God. Nothing we do is complete, which is another way of saying that the kingdom of God lies beyond us. No statement says all that could be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings wholeness. No program accomplishes the church's mission, and no set of goals and objectives include everything. This is what we're about. We plant seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces effects beyond our capacities. We cannot do everything, and there's a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for God's grace to enter and to do the rest. We may never see the end results, but that's the difference between the master builder and the builders. That's the difference between the workers, that we are workers. We are not master builders. We are ministers of the gospel, but not the Messiah. We are prophets of a future not our own. Archbishop Romero understood what it meant to be a minister of the gospel. So today, I think it's important that we ask the right question. And I can't ask it for you.